Harper Doyle's phone buzzed against the polished glass of her desk at 11 at night. The message sent before she had fully registered typing it, her thumb moving faster than the tired circuits of her brain could keep up with. "I miss you. Come home soon." She stared at the screen in the dim glow of the executive floor's after-hours lighting, then felt her stomach fold in on itself as she realized the name at the top of the thread was not her mother, not her best friend Priya Malhotra, but the last contact she had been scrolling through in her exhaustion. Jun Yoon, her boss. The most powerful man in the Korean shipping industry, and the reason her hands had not stopped moving since 6 that morning. 40 floors below her, in the back of a black car crawling through Seoul traffic, Jun's phone lit up against his knee. He looked at it the way he looked at everything, with a stillness that unsettled people long before he ever raised his voice, which he almost never did. He read the 4 words twice. Then he set the phone face down on the seat and stared out the window at the city he owned more of than most people would ever understand, and something he had spent years keeping buried shifted, just slightly, beneath the careful architecture of his composure. He did not reply right away. He was not a man who reacted without calculation. But he did not forget it either, and that alone should have worried him more than it did. Harper had been Jun Yoon's private secretary for 14 months, long enough to know the rhythm of his moods without needing him to explain them, long enough to memorize his coffee order and his silences and the particular way he tapped 2 fingers against his desk when a call displeased him. She had not, in 14 months, ever imagined herself sending him a message meant for someone else entirely, someone warmer, someone who existed in the small, unguarded corners of her life that had nothing to do with quarterly shipping manifests or boardrooms full of men who flinched when Jun entered a room. She typed a correction immediately. "So sorry, wrong thread. Please disregard. Meant for someone else." She hit send and pressed her palm flat against her sternum as if that might slow her heartbeat down through sheer physical pressure. It did not. She sat at her desk in her dark green dress, her long beige coat draped over the back of her chair where she had left it hours ago during a day that had stretched far past any reasonable definition of a shift, and she waited for a reply that did not come. It did not come that night. It did not come the next morning either, when she arrived at 6:45 as always, expecting to find her desk exactly as she had left it, and instead finding a single folded paper crane made from shipping manifest stock sitting precisely in the center of her keyboard. No note, no explanation, nothing but the folded proof that Jun Yoon had stopped at her desk at some point after she had gone home, and had left something behind that was neither a reprimand nor a dismissal. Harper held the paper crane in her palm for a long moment, turning it over, looking for some kind of clue in its careful folds, before tucking it into her desk drawer and telling herself firmly that it meant nothing at all. She had work to do. The Busan shipment paperwork alone would take most of the morning, and she had learned early in her tenure that Jun Yoon did not tolerate distraction, least of all from himself. He called her into his office at 9, which was not unusual, except that he did not immediately hand her a folder or rattle off instructions the way he normally did. He sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled with the precision of a man who did nothing carelessly, and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "The message last night," he said. "It was a mistake." "Yes, sir. I apologize. It was meant for someone else." "I know." His dark eyes did not move from her face. "I read it 3 times before I understood that." Harper felt heat climb up the back of her neck, embarrassment layered under something else she refused to name even privately. "It won't happen again." "That's unfortunate," Jun said, and the corner of his mouth did something that was not quite a smile but adjacent to one, a small shift she had never once seen on his face in 14 months of working 12 feet from his office door. "I found that I did not mind it." She did not know what to do with that sentence, so she said nothing, and he let the silence stretch exactly long enough to become uncomfortable before sliding a folder across the desk toward her. Business resumed. The moment closed as cleanly as it had opened. But something had shifted in the room, and both of them knew it, even if neither said so aloud. Harper had come to Seoul 3 years earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with ambition, a graduate degree in international logistics, and a hunger to prove herself in an industry that had not made space for an American woman without a fight. She had earned her position at Yoon Shipping Group through relentless competence, not connections, and she guarded that reputation the way other people guarded inheritances. She was not the kind of woman who let a paper crane and a strange half-smile from her employer unravel 3 years of professional discipline. She told herself that at least 6 times over the following week, each time with slightly less conviction than the last. The complication arrived on a Thursday, 10 days after the wrong text, when Harper stayed late finalizing contracts for a shipment route through the South China Sea that had been quietly, deliberately obstructed for months by parties June never named directly in front of her, but whose presence she felt in every tense phone call that came through his office late at night. She was gathering her things to leave when she heard raised voices from the private conference room down the hall, a register of anger she had never once heard directed at June Yoon in all her time in that building. She should have left. She told herself that later, more than once. Instead, she paused outside the door, close enough to hear a man's voice, unfamiliar, cold in a different way than June's usual coldness, promising consequences if certain routes were not surrendered by the end of the month. "Your father made promises he could not keep," the voice said. "You inherited his obligations along with his empire. Do not think the Beck family has forgotten what is owed." Harper's pulse spiked. She had heard the name Beck before, always in passing, always accompanied by a particular tightness in June's jaw that told her not to ask further. She backed away from the door too quickly, her heel catching the edge of a decorative planter in the hallway, sending it scraping loudly against the marble floor. The conference room door opened before she could disappear around the corner. June's eyes found her immediately, and for one unguarded second, she saw something flicker across his face that looked almost like fear. Not for himself, she understood instantly, but for what she might have just overheard, and what that could mean for her now. Harper. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it ever had before, quieter, weighted with something that made her chest tighten. "You should not be here right now." The man behind him, silver-haired, expensively dressed, studied Harper with an interest that made her skin crawl in a way she recognized from every difficult man she had ever had the misfortune of dealing with in a professional setting. "Your secretary," the man said, not quite a question. "How much does she know?" "Nothing that concerns you," June said, and something in his voice had gone flat and absolute in a way Harper had never heard from him, a warning delivered so quietly it took her a moment to understand exactly how serious it actually was. The man studied them both a moment longer, unbothered, and let himself out past them without another word, leaving behind a silence thick enough to choke on. June did not speak again until the elevator doors had closed on the man's retreating back, and when he finally turned to face Harper, his composure had cracked just slightly at the edges, enough for her to see the exhaustion underneath. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough to understand you're in trouble," Harper said honestly, because she had never once lied to him in 14 months and did not intend to start now, even with her heart hammering against her ribs. "Enough to understand it's serious. You should go home," June said. "Forget what you heard. This has nothing to do with you." "I don't forget things, June." She used his first name without permission for the first time, and watched something in him respond to it even as his expression stayed carefully neutral. "I catalog everything. It's how I've survived in rooms full of men who wanted me to fail. I'm not going to pretend I didn't just hear a man make demands of you in your own building." He studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind his eyes that she recognized from every high-stakes negotiation she had watched him conduct, except now she understood she had become the variable he was trying to solve for. "The Beck family believes my father owed them something he never intended to give," June said finally, quietly, the words coming slower than she had ever heard him speak. "He died before the matter could be resolved. I inherited the company and the dispute both, and they have decided I am easier to pressure than he ever was." "Is it true, what they're claiming?" "It's complicated in the way these things always are. My father made an arrangement under different circumstances with a man who is dead now, with a family that has decided the arrangement transfers to me regardless of whether I ever agreed to it." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is not something that resolves with paperwork, Harper. This is not the world you signed up to work in." "I signed up to be your secretary," Harper said. "I didn't realize there was a separate world underneath the one I could see. But I'm not going to unsee it now that I know it's there." She thought, even as she said it, about every quiet clue she had ignored over 14 months without letting herself examine them too closely. The men who visited his office and never signed a visitor log. The calls that came through a separate phone he kept in a locked drawer. The particular way certain employees went quiet the moment June walked past, not out of ordinary deference, but out of something closer to caution. She had told herself, each time, that it was simply the nature of running a company as large as his. Standing here now, she understood that she had been choosing not to see the shape of the thing directly in front of her for longer than she wanted to admit. June's expression did something complicated, gratitude and dread tangled together in a way that told her more about the loneliness of his position than any explanation could have. "You should be more careful around me," he said. "Most people learn, eventually, to keep their distance once they understand what my life actually requires. I've spent 14 months watching you run a company that employs thousands of people with more discipline and care than most executives show for a handful," Harper said. "I'm not naive about what that kind of position requires underneath the surface. But I'm not going to start keeping my distance now, June. I don't think I ever really could." Something in his posture shifted, the careful control loosening by a fraction, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man carrying an almost unbearable weight rather than a man who had never known what weight felt like at all. Over the following weeks, the Beck family's pressure intensified in ways Harper observed from the periphery of June's world. Shipments were rerouted under mysterious circumstances. A warehouse in Busan lost power for 3 days under conditions no one could satisfactorily explain. Phone calls left June standing at his office window afterward, his back to the door, for exactly as long as it took him to rebuild whatever composure the call had cost him. Harper found herself staying later, not because her workload required it, but because she had begun to understand that Jun Yoon, for all his empire and all his authority, had almost no one in his life who simply stayed in the room with him during the hard parts. The tenderness, when it arrived, came sideways and small. The way she suspected everything real about June arrived. A late night when she had fallen asleep at her desk over a spreadsheet, waking to find her beige coat draped carefully over her shoulders and June's office light still on down the hall, though it was nearly 2 a.m, and he had a flight to Tokyo at 6. A morning when he corrected her coffee order without being asked, having apparently noticed weeks earlier that she preferred it slightly less sweet than she had initially told the building's cafe. Small things. Almost deniable things. But Harper cataloged each one the way she cataloged everything, and the pile grew steadily heavier with meaning she was no longer sure she wanted to resist. "You watch me," June said one evening, catching her gaze across the office in a moment she had not managed to look away from quickly enough. "It's my job to watch you. I anticipate what you need before you ask for it." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." He set down the document he had been reading, giving her his full attention in a way that made the room feel smaller than it actually was. "You say my name differently than you did a month ago." Harper's breath caught somewhere in her chest.
"Doi."
"You do." He rose from his desk, crossing the space between them slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything, and stopped close enough that she could smell the faint note of cedar beneath his cologne, close enough that the air between them felt charged in a way that made her pulse stutter. "I've spent my entire career learning to read people who tell me what they think I want to hear. I know exactly what it looks like when someone begins to feel something they have not decided to admit yet." "And what does it look like when you feel it?" Harper asked, because two could play at reading a room, and she had never once been the kind of woman who backed down from a direct question. June's expression flickered, something unguarded passing behind his dark eyes before he mastered it again. "It looks like a man who has spent 9 years since my father's death making sure nothing and no one could be used against me. It looks like a man discovering that the strategy has already failed." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unsettling in exactly the way the moment demanded, and neither of them closed the remaining distance. Not yet, both of them understanding without discussing it that whatever this was deserved more weight than a stolen moment in an office at 9 at night. Harper thought about that conversation for days afterward, replaying it in the quiet hours of her small apartment near Han River, where she had lived alone since arriving in Seoul and had never once, until now, felt the particular ache of wanting someone to be there in the empty second half of her evenings. She told herself it was proximity. She told herself it was the natural consequence of spending most of her waking hours in the orbit of one demanding, complicated man. But lying awake at midnight, she recognized proximity for the convenient lie it was. She had begun to want Junyoon in a way that had nothing to do with contracts or coffee orders, and the wanting frightened her more than anything the Beck family had said in that conference room. Her friend Priya, the one person in Seoul who knew the full shape of Harper's days, listened to all of it over dinner one evening with the particular patience of someone who had heard this story building for weeks before Harper finally admitted it out loud. "You're describing a man who is falling for you," Priya said, setting down her chopsticks. "You know that, right?" "I'm describing my boss," Harper said, "who happens to run one of the largest shipping companies in the country and is currently being harassed by a family with a grudge that predates both of us. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, Harper." Priya studied her with the directness of a friend who had earned the right to push. "The question isn't whether he's falling. The question is whether you're willing to admit you already have." "I have a career I built from nothing in a country that was not always eager to make room for me," Harper said. "I did not come to Seoul to fall for the first complicated man who left a paper crane on my desk. No one said you came here to. I'm saying it happened anyway, and pretending otherwise is starting to look like more effort than just admitting it." Priya reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, briefly. "You've never once been a woman who lies to herself about the things that matter, Harper. Don't start now, over something this obvious." Harper did not have an answer for that, not one she was ready to say out loud, and she carried the unanswered question back to work the next morning like something heavy tucked inside her coat. The true escalation arrived 2 weeks later, when the Beck family's patience finally ran out entirely. Harper was leaving the building alone, later than she should have been, when a car pulled alongside her on the quiet street behind the office tower, and a man she recognized from the conference room confrontation rolled down his window with an expression of cold, deliberate calm. "Miss Doyle," he said, using her name like a warning all on its own. "Mr. Yoon should understand that everyone close to him can be reached. Consider this a courtesy. Tell him the family expects an answer by the end of the month, or the conversation will move somewhere less comfortable for everyone involved." He drove away before she could fully process what had happened, and Harper stood on the sidewalk with her heart hammering, understanding with total clarity that she was no longer a bystander to June's world, but a target within it. She called June immediately, and he arrived in under 10 minutes, his composure cracked wide open in a way she had never witnessed, alarm and something raw knotted together on his face as he took in that she was standing there unharmed. "I should never have let you get this close to my world," he said, his hands hovering near her shoulders as though he needed the physical confirmation that she was standing in front of him whole, safe, unmarked. "This is exactly what I swore would never happen again." "Again?" Harper asked, and watched something old and painful move behind his eyes. "A woman I cared for once," he said, the words costing him visibly. "Before I understood how dangerous it was to let anyone matter to me. The Beck family targeted her to send me a message, years ago, before I had the standing to protect anyone properly. I made a decision that day to never let anyone close enough to be used against me again. I have spent every year since keeping that promise. Until you sent a text message meant for somebody else. It's not going to happen to me," Harper said, steadying her voice even as her hands still trembled with adrenaline. "But I'm not going to hide either, June. I want to help end this, not just survive it. This isn't a boardroom negotiation, Harper." "No," she agreed. "It's worse than that, which means it needs someone thinking clearly, and you're too close to it to see every angle." "I'm not." Her idea, when she proposed it the following morning, drew immediately on the skills she had spent 3 years honing in his employ, an intimate knowledge of Yoon Shipping's contracts, of the paper trail that ran beneath every deal her father, and his father before him, had ever struck, including the original arrangement the Beck family claimed had been broken. She spent 2 full days combing through decades-old shipping manifests and correspondence archives most people in the company did not know existed, and found what she was looking for buried in a contract addendum from 12 years earlier, proof that the debt the Beck family claimed June's father owed had, in fact, already been settled in full through a property transfer neither family had bothered to formally record with the shipping registry. "You found this," June said, staring at the documents spread across his desk with something like disbelief. "My own lawyers missed this entirely." "Your lawyers were looking for a way to fight the claim," Harper said. "I was looking for the truth underneath it. There's a difference." The confrontation that followed happened not in shadow but in the sterile, well-lit boardroom of Yoon's shipping group, with the Beck family patriarch seated across from June while Harper stood at his side, presenting the documentation with the same calm precision she brought to every contract negotiation she had ever handled. The silver-haired man's confidence faltered as he examined the property transfer records, understanding in real time that his family's leverage had evaporated under the weight of evidence he could not dispute. "This changes nothing about the respect owed to this family," the man said finally, grasping for ground that had already crumbled beneath him. "It changes everything about the debt owed," June said, his voice quiet and absolute in the way Harper had come to recognize as his most serious register, the tone that ended arguments before they truly began. "The matter is settled according to your own family's records. I trust we will not need to revisit it." The Beck patriarch left without further argument, the threat dissolved not through any show of force but through the sheer, undeniable weight of the truth Harper had uncovered, and the boardroom emptied out into a silence that felt, for the first time in weeks, entirely safe. "You ended this," June said, once they were alone, staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something unguarded and full that made her chest ache. "Not through leverage or pressure. With patience and intelligence no one else in my organization possessed." "I told you I wanted to help end it," Harper said. "I meant it. You could have been hurt for what you uncovered. You put yourself directly in the path of a family capable of real damage, and you did it for me. I did it because you're the first person in this city who ever trusted me with something real instead of just my job title," Harper said. "And because somewhere between a wrong text message and a paper crane, I stopped being able to pretend I didn't feel something too." June crossed the space between them, slower this time, deliberate in the way he approached everything that mattered, and stopped close enough that Harper could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that the air between them finally, fully closed. "I have spent years making sure nothing could be used against me," he said quietly. "I do not know how to explain what it means that the one thing I could not guard against was a wrong number, sent by a woman too exhausted to notice. She had sent it to the wrong person." "You don't have to explain it," Harper said. "You just have to decide what you want to do about it." "I want you to stay," June said. "Not as my secretary. Not out of obligation or gratitude for what you did today. I want you here because I have never once, in this entire life I inherited, wanted someone to simply remain in the room with me the way I want you to." Harper looked up at him, at the man who had built an empire out of discipline and grief and had somehow, despite every wall he had constructed around himself, let a wrong text message become the crack that let everything else through, and she made her choice with the same clarity she brought to every decision that mattered in her life. "I'm staying," she said, "because I choose to. Not because you asked me to, and not because of anything that happened today. Because somewhere along the way this stopped being a job and started being a life I actually want." He did not close the last of the distance immediately. Some understanding passed between them that the moment deserved to breathe before it became something neither of them could take back. Instead, he took her hand, his fingers closing around hers with a gentleness that felt like the opposite of every hard, controlled decision he made in every other part of his life, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, content to simply stand together in the quiet aftermath of everything that had almost gone wrong and had instead, against every reasonable expectation, gone right. They walked out of the boardroom together that evening, and souls stretched out beneath the office tower in a wash of lights that neither of them paid much attention to, both of them thinking instead about the strange, accidental sentence that had started all of it. Harper thought about how close she had come to deleting that message the moment she noticed the mistake, how easily this entire chapter of her life could have ended in an instant of embarrassed backpedaling instead of beginning the way it had. June thought about the paper crane he had left on her desk the morning after, an impulse he still could not fully explain to himself, an act so unlike him that he had almost undone it twice before finally deciding to leave it there and see what happened. In the weeks that followed, their relationship settled into something neither hurried nor hidden, built slowly out of long nights at the office that no longer felt like obligation and quiet dinners that stretched later than either of them intended, both of them still cautious in the particular way of two people who understood exactly how much they had to lose if this went wrong. June introduced her, eventually, to the small handful of people in his life who mattered beyond the company, an aunt who ran a bakery in a quiet neighborhood outside the city center, an old friend from university who had never once asked June for anything and was, for that reason alone, one of the only men June trusted completely. Harper watched him move through those relationships with a warmth she had never once seen him show inside the walls of Yoon Shipping, and she understood, watching it, that she had been given access to a version of him almost no one else ever saw. His aunt, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Youngja, who had raised June for 2 years after his father's death, while the company's board fought over who would take control, studied Harper closely across that first dinner with the particular scrutiny of a woman who had watched too many people try to use her nephew for his name. "You're the one who sent the wrong text," Youngja said, not quite a question, amusement flickering somewhere beneath her stern expression. Harper felt her face go warm.
"He told you that?"
"He tells me almost nothing," Youngja said. "But he mentioned this, twice, in 2 separate conversations, which is more than he has mentioned any woman to me in 9 years. I draw my own conclusions." She poured more tea into Harper's cup without being asked. "I am glad it was a mistake. The honest ones usually are." "You're different here," Harper told him one evening, sitting in his aunt's small kitchen while the older woman fussed over a pot of tea neither of them had asked for. "Softer." "I am not soft anywhere else because I cannot afford to be," June said. "Here and now with you, I finally can be." Harper thought about that sentence for a long time afterward, turning it over the way she turned over every piece of information that mattered to her, and she understood, finally, that this was the answer to the question Priya had asked her weeks earlier over dinner. She had not simply fallen for a powerful, complicated man. She had found, in the middle of a life built entirely around competence and control, a person who let her see the parts of himself he showed no one else, and she had chosen, deliberately and with open eyes, to stay for exactly that reason. She called Priya that same week, and for once her friend did not say, "I told you so," only listened, quietly pleased, as Harper described the bakery, the tea, the strange, easy warmth of June's aunt studying her across a small wooden table. "You sound happy," Priya said finally. "Actually happy. Not just relieved that the danger passed." "I think I am," Harper said, and found, saying it out loud for the first time, that it was true in a way she had not let herself fully claim until that moment. 6 months after the night she had accidentally sent 4 words meant for someone else entirely, Harper stood at the window of the office that had once felt like nothing more than a place she worked 12 hard hours a day, and she watched June across the room reviewing a contract with the same careful, deliberate focus he brought to everything, and she felt something settle in her chest that she recognized, finally, without hesitation or qualification, as certainty. Not the certainty of a fairy tale, and not the certainty of a woman who had stopped being cautious. The certainty of a woman who had looked clearly at exactly what she was choosing, and had chosen it anyway, fully aware of the cost and the risk and the strange, improbable beginning that had brought her here. She thought back, standing there, to the version of herself who had stared at her phone in horror 10 days before any of this began, certain that a single misdirected message had cost her the professional reputation she had spent 3 years building. She had been wrong about almost everything that night except the fear itself, which had been entirely justified, just not for the reasons she assumed. The message had not cost her anything. It had, in the strangest and most unlikely way, given her the one thing her carefully ordered life had never quite managed to include. June looked up and caught her watching him, and this time neither of them looked away. "Say my name again," he said, setting down the contract. "June," Harper said, and watched the same small, real smile move across his face that she had first seen the morning after a wrong text message had rewritten both of their lives, a smile that had taken 14 months and one enormous accident to earn, and that now, finally, belonged entirely to her. Outside the window behind them, Seoul kept moving the way it always did, indifferent to the small private revolution that had taken place inside one office on one ordinary evening. Harper did not need the city to notice. She only needed the certainty sitting quietly in her own chest, steady and unhurried, exactly the way June did everything that mattered. If you enjoyed Harper and June's story, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more dark romance stories just like this one, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of the ending. There are more stories waiting for you, so stay close, and we will see you in the next one.